This is a beautiful and wonderful country, or maybe I should say it was, before it was taken over by murderers, liars, and thieves. Yes, we do have a crime problem, and our biggest crime problems are the people running this government. Strong language? Yes, and I'm prepared to back it up with proof. Right now, though, I want to take a little time to explain who I am, why I made this tape, and why you need to see it. My name is Linda Thompson. I'm chairman of the American Justice Federation. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, and when I was in the Army from 1974 to 1978, I worked first in the Military History Detachment and then for the Commanding General of Allied Forces Central Europe at NATO headquarters. In that capacity, I revised the NATO War Plans manuals. I also served in the Army Reserve afterwards as a training assistant until 1985. During that time, I was a secretary, a homemaker, and mother of 3 boys. I'm an attorney. I have a doctorate in law and a few other degrees of relative insignificance. I'm married to Al, who is a man of the highest character, other than his mom and dad, I've ever had the honor to know. We have 3 sons, and we live in a nice, fairly ordinary home outside of Indianapolis. Al is the president of American Justice Federation, an engineer in charge of our AEN radio and computer news networks. As an attorney, I took a special interest in cases where government agents abused their positions of trust. In fact, the main reason I went to law school was because I wanted to make a lasting contribution to preserving this great country. I believed then, though I don't now, that I could best do this through the courts. I started American Justice Federation because I had seen so many people who were forced to simply surrender their dignity and resign themselves to the fact that the humiliation and injury they suffered at the hands of the government would simply go unpunished.
Beat my child to death. They beat him to death like a dog. Just like a dog. They beat him to death. They beat up his head.
I believed then, and again I don't now, that if a few people here were to fight back through the courts, the abuse would stop or at least be slowed down. In 1987, Al and I began a computer bulletin board service, networking it with other computers across the country. In 1991, we decided to focus the efforts of the network on linking people across the country to share information that was not being reported on the national news. I began to realize that the media was intentionally not covering these stories, and I soon realized that cases where people were savagely beaten, shot, or killed by federal law enforcement and local police were not isolated events. We just weren't being told about them. In Idaho, in August 1992, government agents killed Randy Weaver's only son, 14-year-old Sammy Weaver, and Randy's wife, Vicki. An FBI sniper from the FBI hostage response team in Washington, D.C., appropriately called the HRT, or HURT team, blew the side of Vicki Weaver's head off as she stood holding her 10-month-old daughter, Elishaba, in her arms in the doorway of her own home. The media was kept 2 miles away as all this was going on. U.S. Marshals had set Weaver up, trying to put pressure on him to become an informant for them. 6 U.S. Marshals had traveled all the way from Boston to Idaho and kept Weaver and his family under surveillance, spying on them with cameras for 18 months, filming their every move. Finally, becoming bored, these U.S. Marshals provoked a confrontation by throwing rocks at the house to attract the Weaver's dogs. Kevin Harris and Sammy Weaver, believing they were chasing the Weaver's dog Yeller on the scent of a deer, ran out into a roadway and were confronted by a gunman in camouflage fatigues. The gunman shot the dog. Agents hiding in the woods began firing, hitting their own agent and killing Sammy. As Randy went to check on Sammy's body in the shed later, a sniper fired on him. His wife ran to the doorway of their home holding their baby, calling, "What's happened? What's wrong?" As the sniper's bullet tore off the side of her face, she slumped to her knees and bent over dead in the doorway, shielding her baby even in her death. The governor of Idaho declared martial law, all for one man who'd never bothered anyone. An entire road was built from the highway up the mountain to Weaver's home so that tanks and over 1,000 government agents dressed in full military battle gear could be assembled around Weaver's house. ATF agents with machine guns were posted in the roadways to keep the neighbors back. This was in Idaho, in the United States of America, my country, in 1992. I vowed then that I would personally make it my responsibility to expose the truth to America. On February 28, 1993, the federal government attacked the Branch Davidians in Waco. In the course of investigating our government's actions in Waco, Texas in 1993, I came across the shocking, horrifying proof that our government intentionally murdered its own agents and the people at Mount Carmel in Waco, Texas. Over the next year, I gathered more information about Waco and made a detailed documentary and a tape about the children who were killed in Waco. If you haven't seen these 3 tapes, I urge you to do so. For information on ordering the 3 tapes, you could call 1-800-749-9939. You will see indisputable proof that our government murdered not only its own agents, but 96 people in Waco, Texas, 25 of them children, 17 of them under the age of 5. On April 19, 1993, and perhaps the most publicly televised, outrageous, and inhuman atrocity in the history of this country, government agents rammed tanks through a church home and used poisonous chemicals on 71 men and women and 25 children, 17 of them under the age of 5, in spectacular color before our eyes, burning them to the ground in Waco, Texas, while government agents and the media parroted lies intended to convince the world that somehow these people were meeting a fitting end, yet none of them had committed any crimes. This isn't the justice for all that we grew up hearing about. What happened? What has gone so very wrong? How do we put it right? As I began searching for the answers to those questions, it became clear to me that these pockets of brutality and corruption are merely symptoms of a larger, far more pervasive evil that is now literally controlling this country. This is the New World Order plan, and the scenes you've just seen and the scenes you're about to see are all about the New World Order. And they are why I am doing what I'm doing now and why I won't stop, and why you must listen and why you must know what really is going on in this country. Find out who these people are, what their plan is, and how they got so much power over us. Find out what's going to happen so you can help stop the New World Order.
Do black unmarked helicopters exist? Of course they do. You're looking at some now. These helicopters in Tupelo, Mississippi are Kiowa attack and surveillance helicopters made by Northrop. The small ball on the top is special surveillance equipment that allows the helicopter to descend below a hill and still see above the hill without being seen. These UH-60 Blackhawks were used in Panama. This UH-1 helicopter was filmed this year in Gulfport, Mississippi. Instances of black helicopter sightings are numerous. These attack helicopters were filmed during the siege in Waco, Texas. The small one has some of the highest firepower of any helicopter. These black helicopters were filmed at the FBI headquarters in Waco, Texas by Linda Thompson. Joe from Texas sent us these pictures of a black helicopter buzzing his home. Hilda, another patriot in Mississippi, has been harassed by helicopters and snapped these shots. In downtown Washington, D.C., Linda Thompson and her family were followed for several blocks by a helicopter that passed over 7 times. The Thompsons were able to tape it on the last 2 passes. As you can see, the chopper came down quite low. This is just one of several instances of the Thompsons being buzzed and harassed by black helicopters. Since helicopters first buzzed the Thompsons' home for 3 days in March of 1993, after Linda Thompson began exposing the government's involvement in Waco, Texas. They were doing this purely for harassment. We have received numerous reports and pictures of such sightings from people who have been harassed by black helicopters, usually for speaking out against government activity. In the meantime, the media and government disinformation specialists were telling people that the black helicopters don't exist, and people who claimed to have seen them were crazy. We knew they existed. We began to wonder who they are and where they come from. The harassment the Thompsons have experienced didn't stop with just helicopters. In the parking lot outside American Justice Federation, this target was drawn on Linda Thompson's car. This is one of the cars that followed a staff member at AJF. The office has been broken into, brake lines have been cut on cars of staff members, the office has been buzzed by helicopters, the Thompsons have been shot at several times, their dog was killed, and all of the staff at AJF have been followed repeatedly. One day, Al Thompson was followed by this car, and despite yelling and honking at the driver, he couldn't get the fellow to turn and look at him. Of course, it was a government agent. We've taken pictures of government agents following staff members in airports, cars, and so forth. Our phones have been tapped and our mail tampered with. Shown here is one of the times we had a sweep done for bugs in our office. We knew we must be onto something for someone to be harassing us this much, so we decided we had to find out who these guys are. Who flies the black helicopters and what have they got to hide? We found several black helicopters parked near our offices at the Indiana National Guard Armory in Shelbyville, Indiana. Sometimes there would be black helicopters there, and sometimes not. We called the Indiana National Guard to ask about the black helicopters, but all they would tell us is that they were a unit from Kentucky. We found that when the black helicopters were there, they would park them in the back and disguise them among some dark green ones. It's very difficult to tell the black ones from the dark green ones, especially in the air. You can see the differences here. Here's a green one shown in the background with a black one in the front. Now here's a small black one in the front and a dark green one in the back. We clearly were having no problem finding these helicopters in the air and on the ground. Newspaper clippings we were receiving indicated that black helicopter sightings were widespread. In August of 1993, a team of them flying low buzzed downtown Atlanta, but they weren't identified. People in Atlanta were only told it was an anti-terrorist squad practicing for the 1996 Olympics. This black Chinook was on the front page in Santa Rosa, California in November 1993. These pictures are typical of the types of pictures we receive from people all over the country, many of whom found black helicopters in remote locations, usually in large metal warehouse buildings, like this one. We have found that these are generally CIA operations, and you can usually find a railroad and metal fabricating plant nearby these sites. Mike and Carol Ben of Dallas, Texas have gathered 17 million signatures to impeach Bill Clinton. They've been visited by the Secret Service, who told them, "You have an awfully nice home to be doing what you're doing."
Just shortly before complete daylight on the morning of January 11, 1994, I was jerked out of bed, completely brought awake by a tremendous noise coming down over our home of the military helicopters. And I pulled down the shades and looked out the window, and all I saw was this heavy blanket of fog rolling over the neighborhood, and I couldn't really see it, but I could hear it. And then I heard it move away from over top of our house, across the street, and down. And then I heard it go away. So I, being dazed from being sound asleep that early in the morning and being jerked out of bed, awake by that noise, I thought, well, maybe the fog has echoed the noise somehow and it's thousands of feet in the air or something. I don't know. So I just went back to bed. Looked at the clock when I laid back down. It was like 6:45. And 15 minutes later, I was jerked back out of bed by the noise of fire engines coming down the street. And I thought, well, at this point, I got to put my pants on, go outside and see what in the world is going on here, because there's something drastically wrong. By the time I got outside, it was completely daylight. About 89% of the fog had lifted. They were running hoses over the house and into the house, and the people were running out. The child that was in the house was running out. Found out later that the mother had already left and was coming back to pick up this child a little bit later. So no one was hurt in the fire, but their home was just completely gutted out. And the flames coming out the roof and everything. And I never associated this with the helicopter at that particular moment. We were out in the street, and a bunch of the neighbors were out in the street, standing by the fire trucks, and just having the typical conversations you have in a situation like this. Well, what happened? What's going on? And I asked one of the neighbors, "Did you hear military helicopters down over our houses this morning, right before daylight?" And one of the women said, "Yes, I sure did, and it sure scared me." And I thought, well, gee, that's incredible. So it's not something I was just imagining. The day went on, and within an hour, I wasn't really watching this as a problem with the federal government this time. So we went on with our daily activity of packing mail here and handling the phone calls and talking to radio stations and on and on and on. We noticed that six or eight white plain cars, like medium-sized Chevrolets, drove up the neighborhood. And they're getting out in suits with cellular phones in their ears. So we went on with the day's activity. At 6:30 that night, I was up at 7-Eleven on Tuesday evening on the 11th. One of our other neighbors across the street was there, and while we were in line, I said, "Isn't it terrible what happened this morning with the fire?" And he says, "Yeah, yeah, and he says, when I got home from work at 4:30, he says, I went down there, and the fire marshal didn't know what had caused the fire, but he says, one of the guys, the insurance people, now we're talking about these people in the gray suits with the cellular phones, walked up to him and said that the fire started by lightning. And he said, I thought that was kind of funny because there was no rain or lightning this morning. And I says, well, there sure wasn't any rain or lightning this morning. That house couldn't have been hit by lightning. And all of a sudden, a little alarm started going off in my head that we had a real problem here. And obviously, that was meant for us. And so we're totally alarmed by this time. We know that there is a real problem. We know that that military helicopter from looking at the roof now, because they got the fire out right away and went into the house. One end of the house, you can tell from the pictures that you've already seen earlier in this tape, the roof was totally burned off. But at the other end of the house, in the bedroom end of the house, you can see that the round holes were, something obviously entered that house, started on fire. And there's just no question about it. We've seen the beginning of this video.
That was a segment of home video from Mike, so we couldn't do anything with the soundtrack you just heard, but we think you'll find these pictures very convincing.
As you can see with the aerial on the roof, it'd be impossible for this house to be hit by lightning without burning the ground wires to that aerial. I don't know if we can see the ground wires, test the aerial or not. I'll get in as close as I can. There you go. There's a ground wire running down the side of that hole, and that would definitely be burning in half. If the house were hit by enough lightning to start it on fire as bad as this, with holes in the roof and everything. And we can see that that's not so. And of course, the way it's burnt out right here in this area is the kitchen area of the house, and then back here to the left is the garage area of the home. And right in that area to the right of the garage door there, back into the garage, is the utility room, and that's why they have changed it from the house was hit by lightning, because they forgot to take the aerial down. But they're saying that the fire was started by the hot water heater.
This is the room where the water heater was located. There is no damage whatsoever to any of the walls or the inside studs. There's no scorching of any of the floors or walls. Even the roof has no damage from the water heater. No damage to the roof could have come from this room. Going to the outside rooms, there's very little damage to those rooms as well. The fire in this house could not have started with the water heater. So Mike checked the electrical system to see if the fire could have been started by an electrical fire, or a lightning strike, as the inspector originally claimed. If this had been an electrical or lightning fire, we would expect to see damage to the electrical boxes. Yet there is none. In fact, there is no damage to any of the interior walls as there would have been with an electrical fire. As you saw earlier, the antenna and wiring on the roof were intact too. In fact, the only fire damage, as you can see on these rafters, is from the outside on the roof down. Any place there is burning, it's from the top down. This was probably the most convincing part of Mike's video. These shots of the rafters show that all of the burning had to have originated from the roof. There is no damage coming from the inside. It is all from the roof down. If you look at these holes on the roof, these are holes made by the firemen with their axes. Yet over to the right, there are very clearly missile holes burned from the outside in. We've had military people identify these holes as the type made by sabot rounds fired from helicopters. The burning very plainly goes in. This was very plainly not an electrical fire, a lightning strike, or a fire from a water heater. This was a hit from black helicopters.
It's just incredible, and it is frightening. And I'll tell you, the only thing that has saved us here is that Carol and I have realized from the beginning that what we were starting was standing up against the federal government. And we've all heard nightmares about people in the past who've tried to stand up against the federal government and failed. about.
The date indicator on Mike's video is wrong. That attack occurred in January of 1994 and was a powerful motivator to find out who these guys are. We found them at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. This is concertina wire surrounding the perimeter outside their headquarters, marked by a sign that has the Army Special Operations Group symbol on the left and the 101st Airborne Eagle on the right. This is their headquarters. It is the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, often called Task Force 160, or the Night Stalkers. Their chain of command goes up to the Army Special Operations Group commander. They have 600 various types of helicopters at Fort Campbell and keep 300 of them outside at a time. More of their helicopters are located throughout the country. This group is often referred to as Delta Force, but the truth is there is no one Delta Force. Task forces are formed from members of special forces such as the 10th Mountain Division or the 75th Rangers out of Fort Benning, Georgia, or from members of law enforcement such as the ATF, DEA, FBI, IRS, CIA, or other government agencies and even private corporations. The members of the task forces often receive fake orders, so their own units do not know they are participating in a Task Force 160 mission. Task Force 160 members are special operations group leaders in these task forces, and the helicopters are flown by pilots from the 160th. The 160th practices urban combat or domestic support operations that consist of dropping members of these task forces into cities. As the parachutists are dropped into the city, the helicopters provide a diversion by firing down on civilian targets. The members of these task forces are given special training along with fake identification. They are dropped into a city where they get jobs, map the city, population centers, police and fire departments, then later they conduct a mock takeover of the city. These camouflaged C-5A cargo planes were at Fort Campbell. 3 stories tall, they can move large numbers of troops and equipment and are usually seen wherever the black helicopters are sent for an operation. In Waco, at the same building where FBI headquarters was located and where black helicopters were parked during the Waco siege, Chrysler Technologies paints these very same C-5As. Some are painted a camouflage color, some plain gray, some with a red, green, and gray color scheme, similar to the Arizona National Guard, and some with the red and green FEMA colors. There's obviously a connection between private defense contractors, federal law enforcement, and military special operations groups, which was well established during the siege in Waco and becomes more clear as we see how these groups play a role in the New World Order. In this 1993 Army Field Manual 100-20, Special Operations Forces are particularly well suited to domestic support missions. Domestic means they are to be used on us here in the United States. They are under the U.S. Special Operations and Special Operations Integration Command. They also have a Civil Affairs sister unit at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Civil Affairs units are propaganda units. Waco was one such domestic support operation involving local and federal law enforcement and military, as shown in the ATF final report. On pages 73 and 78, you can see that the raid was planned by Special Forces from Fort Bragg. The main ATF planner, Bill Buford, was former Special Forces. The raid on Waco was conducted as a military assault, and in our Waco tapes you will plainly see that military Special Forces were in Waco the day Mount Carmel was burned down. Last, the 2 evaluators, Rod Pascal and Wayne Ishimoto, were both retired Delta Force commanders. Remember, Delta Force is another name for Task Force 160. Here we see another example of training for a domestic support operation, as a military unit on maneuvers at Fort Polk, Louisiana, is trained in house-to-house search and seizures and forcible entry as reported in Soldiers Magazine. Fort Polk, Louisiana is now a joint UN training center, and even the U.S. Marshal Service in Pineville is training marshals to be employed all over the world. This is the look of our future law enforcement, as UN troops from all countries practice house-to-house searches and seizures on us. Sound paranoid? Take a look at this National Institute of Justice bulletin that speaks of a multi-jurisdictional task force unit and blatantly brags that asset seizures ensures the financial viability of these task forces. Examine newspaper articles and you'll see plenty of proof of these multi-jurisdictional task forces breaking into homes without warrants, as they did in Puerto Rico last year, all supposedly in the name of the war on drugs. These multi-jurisdictional task forces, comprised of state and federal law enforcement and military units, rousted 500 people from their homes and only made 5 arrests. In 1993, government housing projects in New York, Chicago, and Boston were also subjected to these same types of warrantless searches and seizures. If a gun was found in the home, the adults were arrested and their children were put into foster homes. Whether these raids are legal or not doesn't matter when people risk losing their children if they open their mouths. At the February 18, 1994 crime briefing, Janet Reno, Lloyd Benson, Henry Cisneros, and Al Gore announced that these raids had been tests, and these warrantless raids were going to be conducted across America. Of course, our media propaganda machine will do its part. You may remember our returning hero from peacekeeping in Somalia.
That is Durant holding the maroon beret, the distinctive maroon beret of the Night Stalkers. That is his airborne unit, the elite airborne unit.
Durant, with his maroon beret, was from the Night Stalkers in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, Task Force 160th, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the guys who flew the black helicopters. In this home video from Somalia, you can see what the media didn't tell you. The day before Durant was shot down, he had been a pilot of the helicopters that, as usual, created its diversion by firing down into the crowd of unarmed civilians below. Notice the cannons at the front of the helicopters firing down into the crowd below. We don't have to wonder very long why these peacekeepers, these supposed heroes, were shot down in this domestic peacekeeping operation. Special operations groups are the key to all these operations. Conventional ground forces are not used, at least at first. The black helicopters are sent in along with the black cargo planes. They drop in their parachutists and then create a diversion by firing down on the city below. Our hand-picked media would have you believe that Panama was nothing but a third-world minor conflict with few casualties. The truth was revealed in the award-winning documentary Panama Deception. As you can see, the devastation in Panama from their diversion was complete. Is it far-fetched to imagine that these UN peacekeeping forces would be used against American citizens? The 502nd, another unit from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, is shown here arriving as peacekeepers in Somalia wearing their UN blue berets and UN insignia. Shortly thereafter, this same unit, the 502nd, was in Arkansas practicing house-to-house searches and seizures in a joint UN training mission called Agile Provider in the spring of 1994. Agile Provider involved 44,000 UN troops, including troops from France and the Netherlands, training in the states of Georgia, North and South Carolina, Arkansas, and Tennessee. Yes, UN troops have been trained in this country in the past, but not in brigade strengths and not in domestic support house-to-house searches and seizures. Many of our congressmen deny that UN troops are being trained in this country at all. But as you can see in these clips from Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, Germans were training here last spring.
Das ist die Baracke 1660, die da. Vom Bodenzug, der Hitzschollen,
UN training has become so widespread that many of the newspapers around the country have had at least one such story. In Washington state, Gurkha mercenaries have trained for 3 years in a row. Gurkha mercenaries are from Nepal, which is a primitive country. Yet Gurkhas have a world-class reputation as a highly skilled, well-disciplined assassin team. Their country is densely populated. Their religions are primarily Eastern, either a form of Buddhism or Hinduism. It is this background that lends itself to the Gurkhas' single-mindedness in their tasks and training. Coming from Nepal, the Gurkhas are not accustomed to any modern conveniences, not even the basics of running water. For them, what we would consider to be deprivation is a way of life. Gurkha mercenaries are homegrown, farm boy assassins. It is an honor for them to die in combat for their country or for their religious beliefs. Nepal is not a theocracy, yet every aspect of the people's lives centers around their religious beliefs. Throughout the country, statues are erected to various gods and goddesses of these religious beliefs. People will say prayers for a baby about to be born, for the success of a crop just planted, or to ward against evil spirits who would invade their homes at night. Or they might say a special prayer for the blessing of the good gods to protect them from the evil god Kali. The overpowering and menacing spirit of the evil god Kali is evident in the statues and paintings throughout Nepal. Kali must be appeased or satisfied. Oftentimes, there will be a special altar in the village square where goats are sacrificed by cutting off their heads to ward off the evil Kali. The background of these peasant Nepalese Gurkha mercenaries would be of little concern if they were not conducting joint training with our military in our country. More disturbing is a provision in House Bill 3355, the 1994 Crime Bill, Section 5108, which says that not later than 6 months after the date of enactment of the bill, the Attorney General, along with the heads of the FBI, DEA, Immigration, and Customs, are supposed to report on the success of the efforts to hire Royal Hong Kong police officers into federal law enforcement positions. What does this have to do with the Gurkhas? In an article in UPI on February 6, 1994, 7 Gurkha soldiers were awarded Britain's Victoria Cross for service during World War II. This article mentioned that these Gurkhas are currently serving with the British Army in Hong Kong, in other words, the Royal Hong Kong Police. This official news release from the Navy High Command at LANTCOM further confirms that UN troops were training in this country this past spring in forcible entries of homes using special operations tactics. News releases from around the country speak of law enforcement and military training together for so-called terrorist suppression involving attacks on civilian facilities. Did you know that 49 of our most famous landmarks have been given to the United Nations as supposed biospheres? Yet many of these supposed biospheres are located outside military facilities and are used for covert UN military special operations training areas. On the border between the U.S. and Canada, we see the UN flag flying between the U.S. and Canadian flags. Throughout cities in America, UN flags are popping up outside government buildings. But perhaps most disturbing was this letter received by New American Magazine detailing a survey given to Marines at 29 Palms Base. We confirmed this survey was given to Army Special Operations recruits. The survey asked troops whether they would swear to the following code. I am a United Nations fighting person. I serve in the forces which maintain world peace and every nation's way of life. I am prepared to give my life in their defense. This survey also asked if these U.S. military men would fire upon U.S. citizens who refuse or resist confiscation of firearms banned by the U.S. government. The signs of the military being combined with or used as law enforcement are just about everywhere once you begin to look. We found these 2 military LCMs parked in St. Petersburg Harbor in April 1994. They are U.S. Army, parked outside of the new St. Petersburg Beach Police facility where they will patrol the waters. Did you notice the federal tax agents dressed like military patrolling the roads during the Waco siege, or the black military helicopters at each of the Indy 500 races for the past several years? In June this year, a hostage situation at Denny's in Indianapolis brought out the Indianapolis SWAT team dressed in full military battle fatigues carrying machine guns. Welcome to the New World Order, where military occupation is a way of life, as police with their machine guns and military battle fatigues or black assassin clothing are indistinguishable from the military that often accompany them. The White House proposes that the DEA and ATF be combined into one Gestapo federal police force. Yet this has already happened, as we have already seen in countless examples. We are being conditioned to accept combined military and law enforcement all around us, as we are told we shouldn't be concerned. Just as people in Alaska were told not to be concerned about the unidentified black uniformed military troops with machine guns making traffic stops this year either. LA Police Chief Willie Williams and 2 others, all directly involved in the cover-up of the firebombing of MOVE headquarters in Philadelphia in the 1980s, were supposed independent investigators in Waco, and not surprisingly recommended that federal law enforcement should receive their training from Special Forces military. This shouldn't be too surprising coming from the police chief of Los Angeles, where Daryl Gates formed the first SWAT team, where the term SWAT originally meant Special Weapons Assault Team, and where brutality has become commonplace. The military mindset begins at basic training for LAPD, who train just like the Marines in boot camp. Somehow fascism as a model for good behavior has become commonplace. Governor Zell Miller of Georgia has instituted boot camps for juvenile offenders, where young offenders can be adequately brainwashed to fit into the military mindset of the New World Order. Texas has decided to try the boot camp idea for its young offenders as well. They will endure hours of physical training and learn the defenses of nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare. Courses will include Air Force history, national security, the rules of combat, and how to salute. Are these young offenders the new cannon fodder for the New World Order? In Indiana, we found this minimum security state prison located in the middle of a U.S. Army Reserve training base, Camp Atterbury, just south of Indianapolis. These black vans at the prison drew our attention because people in Alaska had told us about dark vans driven by unidentified men in dark black uniforms carrying machine guns, stopping people on the highways. We also found these Indiana Department of Corrections employees dressed in black uniforms who drove one of the dark vans. We found that these state facilities are being built in the middle of U.S. Army property, not just in Indiana, but other states, as people sent us pictures of such facilities in their states, such as this facility at Camp Pinckney in Brighton, Michigan. You see not only the black vans here, but curiously, there are reverse swastikas carved into each end of the roof. We also began to receive information about the Federal Emergency Management Agency known as FEMA, such as these pictures of a FEMA facility in Texas. FEMA operations are divided into 10 regions, as we were told in this letter from FEMA. The American public has been led to believe that FEMA is for disaster relief operations. Yet if we look at military manuals such as FM 4130, the U.S. Army Civil Affairs and Operations Manual, you'll find the details about who FEMA really is. The government doesn't want this information out because, as you can see, the manual says to destroy it by any means that will prevent its dissemination. The manual says that FEMA is the executive agency that serves as the point of contact for the USG for emergency management within the United States. Under Executive Order 12148 of July 20th, 1979, the President transferred all functions from the Civil Defense, Civil Preparedness agencies under the Department of Defense to FEMA. FEMA develops and implements overall concepts and policy guidance and directs activities for nationwide plans and preparedness for emergencies during peace and war. It also develops plans, systems, and capabilities for protection of the U.S. populace, government, and industry, and for stabilization of the economy in time of emergency. Again, we see from this military manual that FEMA is divided into 10 regions and is the command and control agency for all emergency planning. None of this sounds too sinister until you begin to find out what FEMA has done with 96% of their budget. FEMA has built prisons around the country, and they've also built underground facilities. It actually turns out that they are the key agency to implement a plan known as Operation Garden Plot, the plan to put American citizens in prison camps. Under Executive Order 12919, signed by Bill Clinton on June 3, 1993, presidential authority under a 1950s Defense Production Act was delegated to the Secretaries of Defense, Agriculture, Treasury, and Commerce to seize all civilian property for the government solely by declaring them necessary for national defense. It also gave the Director of FEMA the authority to implement FEMA plans during a national emergency. Most people don't realize that this country has been in a declared state of emergency since the Federal Emergency Act was enacted in 1933, which was the beginning of FEMA, and also gave presidents the authority to issue executive orders. Each president since then has issued an executive order declaring a state of national emergency. Bill Clinton has issued 3 such orders since he took office. Shown here is a FEMA facility in Denton, Texas, where you can see mile after mile of FEMA command and control trailers. These trailers are self-sustaining and contain electrical generators and communications equipment that can be moved out anywhere in the country to start a FEMA operations center. Several military manuals, such as these manuals, ranging from 1985 through 1994, speak of FEMA as the implementing agency for Operation Garden Plot, the plan to put American citizens in prison camps under military control. This 1994 Field Manual for Military Police speaks of Operation Garden Plot as a DoD civil disturbance plan that tells the military what they can and cannot do, and that they will operate under FEMA control. This is a FEMA facility in Denton, Texas, with Region 6 plainly noted on its sign from the FEMA regional map. Notice that this agency that is supposedly to protect us is highly guarded with electronically controlled fencing, topped by barbed wire, guarded by speakers and cameras. There are numerous sophisticated satellite, microwave, and radio towers inside the fencing. Much of this can be said to be needed in the case of a national disaster or emergency, but one recent communications development of interest is that all federal and state police agencies have gone to the same radio frequencies, so that we do now have a nationwide communication system among all the police agencies and FEMA. This particular FEMA facility can hold about 500 people underground. One way to determine the size of the underground facility are the vents, such as these, sticking up out of the ground for ventilation to the underground areas. The FEMA plans to imprison American citizens have generated a lot of interest around the country in locating the potential prison camps throughout the country. These may be facilities currently being used as prisons, such as those you saw earlier, or prisons that are being built supposedly in the name of the war on drugs, or facilities that have other uses but which could be quickly used to detain large numbers of people, such as this Amtrak facility in Beech Grove, Indiana. We're standing now in the main parking lot, which doesn't look too sinister. At this level, it is a very large parking lot, fenced on all sides by fence topped by barbed wire. It also has these electronically operated turnstiles. There is also a surveillance camera, just like we saw at the FEMA facility, pointing out to the parking lot, and a helicopter windsock. All of these apparent security measures are particularly unusual here, because this is a very low crime area, and this facility is nothing but an old train repair station with nothing in it worth stealing. In this portion of the parking lot is a brick building, suitable for processing, next to a gate that leads right out to the railroad tracks, and all of this is contained inside a fully fenced area, now 3 layers deep in fencing at this point. This U.S. Air Force train indicates federal and military involvement. Facing the opposite direction, you can see that this area, too, is a very large fenced area with railroad track running the length of the fence and plenty of warehouses. This facility was supposed to have closed in June of 1993, yet instead, several $1 million in federal funds have been spent on supposed renovations over the past 2 years. Helicopter windsocks and markers are evident throughout the property. This small building is the only way into a particular fenced area. Inside this building, we see more of the motion-activated detectors, electronic turnstiles, and prison bars. All of the renovations to this property have involved putting in new fencing, electronic turnstiles, concrete flooring in unused warehouse buildings, and putting in large gas furnaces on buildings that were never heated any time in the past 20 years. Outside this building is fencing and a cattle run section of fence, all topped by barbed wire, pointing inward, not to keep people out, but to keep people in. This was common throughout the facility, particularly the new fencing that had been erected. Inside the fenced area on the other side of the building, you'll see signs that say Red Zone, right up next to the railroad tracks that run the length of the fenced area. Next to the Red Zone sign, you can see closely numbered markers on the fences that are too closely spaced to be parking markers, just as if they plan to have people line up to board the trains. Here's a helicopter marker on the power lines outside the facility, indicating expected helicopter traffic, and again, another tall radio antenna. Looking around, you can get an idea of how huge this place is and how many people it could contain in its fenced-in area. In yet another fenced area, we see a large warehouse building at the end, with the electronic turnstiles in front of it. The building is one that has a new concrete floor, and its doors and windows have all been blocked. Outside, there are new gas pipes. Even as we were filming, a black helicopter flew over us, observing what we were doing, which has happened many times when we have been at the facility. The gas lines and gas pipes at the facility run the length of the buildings. And come out at some very, very large, brand new furnaces that have been installed at the buildings throughout the facility. We found this crane, which has seen better days, but is plainly marked U.S. Army in the middle of the stockyard. We found other fully working military trucks and equipment here at other times. Inside the facility, we found large fenced-in areas next to the railroad tracks marked green zone and blue zone, suitable for holding a lot of people. Many of the old warehouse buildings have had new concrete floors put into them. Unused sections of railroad track have been dug up and replaced, and from the supplies in the stockyards, it is obvious they will be doing even more construction and fencing. Senator Lugar of Indiana recently obtained more federal funding to renovate this facility, which is supposedly only for the repair of broken trains and where most of the buildings on the property haven't been used for years. It certainly appears they are expecting more than just broken trains. This tower, overlooking the entire facility at one end of the facility along the railroad tracks, also has a radio antenna on it with a ladder up inside of it. It would make an excellent watchtower. One thing we discovered last year are these stickers on the backs of traffic signs along highways in various states. They come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. These you're seeing now are in Indiana. We found a veritable smorgasbord of these stickers near Crane Naval Air Station. As we approached the facility, the stickers we could see were solid, and as we drove away from the facility, the stickers we could see were the same shapes and colors as those on the other side of the road, but they had holes in them. We believe these are what are called tachomars, which is a military acronym for troop transport markers. We have found these stickers in many different states, such as these in Michigan and Kansas. Following the blue ones in Indiana, we often end up at railroad tracks. In Utah, following blue stickers led to missile storage sites. Some stickers are put up by state agencies to mark the date that a sign is installed. These are easy to distinguish from the troop movement stickers because they have a date and the name of the agency that inspected the sign or sticker. The troop movement markers do not have any markings on them. The troop movement stickers are solid colors that would allow UN troops to follow a color-coded pattern to a specific area or to operate in a specific color-coded boundary. These types of markers on the ground are helicopter direction markers. These have been found in areas just prior to the troop movement stickers appearing. These are indicators that your state is being marked according to Global Positioning Satellite System grid coordinates. Bridge markers will contain elevation and positioning information, which makes it very simple to trap an entire population by blowing out bridges using these coordinates. We are being conditioned to accept increasing surveillance in all aspects of our lives. When military units were chasing Aidid in Somalia, our newspapers reported the use of high-tech helicopters and electronic cameras and devices that from space could capture the state motto on an automobile license plate as if this were just business as usual. Military equipment is being converted to law enforcement use, such as using submarine detection equipment and high-tech surveillance gear to track people. ATF has long been involved in tracking our guns. In 1992, Congress appropriated $233 million for what is being called the Intelligent Vehicle Highway System, or IVHS for short. Another $240 million was appropriated in 1993. This is the national surveillance system being set up along all the highways all across America to spy on Americans. You may doubt that this federal surveillance system is real, so we're listing the reference numbers so that you can take these numbers down to your local library and look these bills up in your own government's public records. This is the national tracking system being set up all over our country. As usual, our lame media is touting this as if it's a great thing, and the government is selling it to us as if it was for our own good. Go out right now onto the interstate and look at the extremely tall light poles. When you find one with an antenna on it like this one, look closely and you'll see it has a camera. These cameras are part of the IVHS system that is being touted as the Great Oz of travel coordination. Supposedly, your car will be able to communicate with these cameras to tell you the shortest route to travel or how far you have left to go, which is pretty lame when you consider that AAA has been doing this for years without spying on us. More importantly, these cameras can receive and tape information from your car, such as where you are. And all these cameras feed their information back to law enforcement agencies. This light pole has two cameras on it, pointing in opposite directions. Most of these cameras are located on the interstates for now. These cameras can be used to film people's license plates and generate tickets, or communicate with computers in police cars and even monitor you from satellite. Sound far-fetched? Satellites are already being used to track 18-wheel semi-trucks. Their movements show up on a large electronic map at the trucking headquarters, or wherever they'd like it to appear for that matter. Yet, if this were merely to help facilitate the movement of truck traffic around the country, why would the trucks need this warning that lets everyone know that a satellite is tracking it? This satellite tracking technology works by reflecting information from the receiving end on the truck to the scanner in the satellite. The satellite sends out a light source, and the information on the truck is reflected back to the satellite much the same way as the scanners in your local supermarket scans a barcode on your groceries. The technology isn't limited to barcodes because we have a circuitry that is so small it can contain hundreds of pages of information in a transponder that is so small it can be injected through a hypodermic needle. Humane societies have begun using these transponders to mark animals. A scanner can scan the transponder, and whatever information is on the scanner will show up on the scanner. The media is touting these InfoPet transponders as painless and harmless, and, of course, it's a wonderful way to locate our lost pets. The truth? On July 29, 1994, a UPI article quoted ASPCA Senior Vice President Stephen Zawistowski as saying, "These chips allow us to find the people. We can prosecute them for cruelty. One of our great interests in the chip is for law enforcement purposes." Sematech makes a transponder that is 1/200th the size of a human hair. Will the national ID card requested by President Clinton actually be an implantable transponder? Sandia, a large defense electronics weapons contractor, has teamed up with Sematech. Think of the applications here. Wonder where all this spying and tracking information may go? Let's examine FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a 92-computer data bank in Vienna, Virginia, that contains information about everyone in the country, from your property records, health records, tax records, criminal history, all at the fingertips of law enforcement. Did you know our money contains a cellulose strip with silver lettering on it? Can our money be scanned from a distance? Can police tell how much you have? The plan to redesign the dollar mentions cosmetic changes, but Senate Bill 2158 creates a dual-standard international and national dollar, which would cause hyperinflation, bankrupting the trucking industry, as imported gas prices skyrocket, leaving us with a 7-day food supply. How long will it be before everyone has to take a national ID and stand in a federal bread line? The Organized Crime and Drug Enforcement Task Force, OCDEF, is the coordinating agency that pulls all state and federal agencies together into multi-jurisdictional task forces, referred to in Public Law 100-690. The National Federal Police Force already exists. OCDEF can pull assets from any federal agency, including active-duty military, to use in law enforcement projects. They are flown in black helicopters with pilots from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, identified in this Time Life book series as the Night Stalkers, whose motto is "Death Waits in the Dark." The funding for these task forces is funneled through OCDEF and is untraceable to any given agency. These multi-jurisdictional task forces can be made up of DEA, ATF, FBI, IRS, Customs, and even UN troops. These small task forces are equipped with high-tech weaponry called non-lethal weapons to make it more efficient for a small group of men to attack a large group of people. One such weapon is an EMP weapon, an electromagnetic pulse weapon that imitates the blast from an automatic weapon and effectively disables the electronic circuitry. 4 EMP towers capable of regional destruction can be found in the Combined Federal Register, Volume 59, Number 10, from Friday, January 14, 1994. Small EMP devices called auto-arresters are implantable in roads to stop individual cars and available as weapons. Other non-lethal weapons have been perfected as well.
2 Russian psychologists have been brought in from Moscow to demonstrate a technique for analyzing the human mind and then influencing it. The concept is that with an understanding of an individual's mind, key words transmitted in music or white noise will force that person to obey. The FBI examined the system to use against David Koresh at Waco in Texas.
Los Alamos Labs in New Mexico is the clear leader in developing non-lethal weapons, such as laser lights that blind, sound waves that make large groups of people sick, microwaves that can burn people from a distance. These weapons are touted as being more humane, but in fact they disable a large group of people at one time, enabling a small group to go in and quickly and quietly kill them. John Alexander is the leader in the development of these weapons for Los Alamos. several thousand U.S. troops are training in the U.S. this summer and fall, and if we look around us, we can see plenty of the signs and symptoms of a global takeover under the auspices of the United Nations taking place right here in our country. These trucks are Soviet trucks imported from eastern Germany, parked at a private facility in the DeSoto National Forest in Sautier, Mississippi, just outside Gulfport off Highway 59. A sign on the facility says Airmar. Airmar is privately owned, but the signs on fences around the facility say this is a U.S. Customs facility. Several acres of federal forest land was bulldozed to create this customs facility solely for Airmar. Airmar tells us these trucks are going to be refurbished, refitted, and repainted to be delivered to third world countries for use as vegetable and food trucks. However, these trucks began appearing in late February, and by July, none of these trucks had been refurbished. Notice that these trucks are fully loaded. Look closely at the equipment that includes equipment to spray nerve gas, tires that are self-inflating to travel in up to 4 feet of water, and heavy radio and communications equipment. They have bills of lading on them that plainly show these trucks were shipped from Germany, UN, meaning they were shipped out of Germany and into the U.S. with the UN bill of lading on them. These few white trucks, not chemical trucks, which Airmar admitted were not refurbished, were brought in from California as samples. Airmar claimed it was just a coincidence that white was a popular color in hot third world countries. This privately owned facility is protected by the federal government. Notice that here, too, there is a high radio tower. No one knows for sure what this facility really is, but one thing is certain, it's not what we're being told it is. And there are 750 Soviet chemical trucks sitting in Mississippi whose sole use is to spray chemicals and nerve gas in chemical warfare operations. What are they doing in Mississippi? What are they doing on U.S. soil? And why are they under the protection of the U.S. government if they are privately owned? The equipment on these trucks has not been stripped off, and they are not being refurbished. Instead, they plainly look as if they are ready to be used, perhaps on us. Is this part of bringing UN troops into the United States as peacekeepers? It could well be. In the past year, we have located UN troops training at Fort Polk, Louisiana, Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, Camp Atterbury, Indiana, Fort Carson, Colorado, Fort Richardson, Alaska, Fort Benning, Georgia, Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, Fort Dix, New Jersey, Fort Rucker, Alabama, and the School of the Americas in Georgia. And Soviet troops are coming to this country for joint training throughout the summer and fall. Senator Sam Nunn from Georgia was quoted as saying he was certain the American public would welcome the Soviet troops as peacekeeping forces in the United States. Not only have these Soviet trucks been found in Mississippi, people recently photographed these two clearly marked Soviet vehicles in Texas. This wall, recently built at a National Guard facility in Gulfport, Biloxi, Mississippi Airport, is being made to encompass the entire facility and has gun turret holes throughout, though the wall is claimed to be a sound barrier. As you travel along Highway 59 from Gulfport, near a NASA facility, you'll be stopped along this state highway by an armed federal guard who will give you a pass marked NASA and no firearms, no cameras, no stopping, and don't get out of your car. At the Gulfport Biloxi Regional Airport, there are also several unusual planes and black helicopters next to a National Guard facility. This is the same facility that has the so-called sound barrier wall. This train full of American-made tanks was one of 7 such trains that passed through Indianapolis en route to Fort Lewis, Washington in June. We were told that this was the 3rd Armored Division returning from Europe. Yet Fort Lewis has such a severe housing shortage that many military families are actually living in tents. Yet this whole division is being sent there. 3 other such trains passed through Indianapolis in early August, one heading to Fort Riley, Kansas, another to Alabama, and the third to Fort Lewis, Washington. Are these tanks part of Operation Garden Plot, to be used to round us up for the slave labor camps, along with the black helicopters and federal law enforcement that look like active-duty military stationed in our roadways as they were in Waco? Welcome to the New World Order. Expect no mercy.